I loved this episode, and this isn't my first time recording this. In fact, actually, my opinion of this episode has changed dramatically between recordings, and the more I thought about the episode, the more I actually like it. This is an episode that grew on me a lot over time, and it's actually been a few days since I watched it. And usually whenever I make an episode review or a video like this, I force myself to like record it and everything and then go out and see what other people's opinions are so that I don't accidentally like, steal or plagiarize or anything. And out of curiosity, after recording, I decided to check out other people's opinions this episode, and I found out it was a fairly controversial one. It was one that got hated on quite a bit. And that's funny because that means that for one of the only times ever in this entire CardFight Vanguard reboot series, I'm going to be defending an episode that everyone else seems to hate. So yeah, the tables have turned, right? I'm defending this episode against criticism. That's not something that we're used to in this series here. So yeah, let's kind of get through it. There's a lot to get through and not much real time to do it. I don't want to split this into multiple videos or anything, so let's just go. So first of all, let's talk about the Tachibana and Mark stuff just to get it out of the way. It was really well done. This episode, once again, focused on having lots of different kind of plot lines going on at the same time, and it cut between them beautifully. I really love how the Shin arc is able to do that. I feel like the more different plot lines it has to cut between, the better it does balancing them all, which is crazy because you would have thought the less there is, the easier it is to focus on it, right? But no, I actually really like how it had multiple plot lines that it kept cutting between, and it did a really good job of it. It helped pace everything else nicely. I think it also might be the reason we've been getting better card fights recently. I feel like this anime doesn't trust that everyone has an attention span to just watch a card fight in its entirety. And so previously they just skipped through them very quickly. And now they've kind of been taking this approach of, okay, we'll show it in pretty much its entirety, but we're going to keep cutting between different plot lines and stuff. And luckily it does it well. This sounds like something that should be annoying, but it actually does a really good job of it. So Tachibana and Mark are heading to Etsuka Tower to save Mikuru from being kidnapped in the previous episode. And they go in and they card fight Fujinomi, and it's a good card fight. There's not much else to really say about that part of the plot, which is good because the other part of the episode is the part I have a lot to talk about with. I will say at the beginning of the Mark plotline though, him acting like a ninja, it's still wearing pretty thin, but luckily it wasn't anything too annoying in this episode. And I do definitely feel like this episode and this arc in general has been starting to tone down the humor a little bit, and that's cool. So let's get into the actual part of the episode. Let's get into the part that everyone's was talking about. Again, I'm striking when the iron is ice cold with these videos, so I do really appreciate anyone who's still sticking around. I'm hoping to catch up fairly quickly. The Mikuru plotline. So Mikuru is, kidnapped by Etsuka, so she's in Etsuka's tower, and Etsuka, instead of, doing the usual kidnapping stuff, she tries to convince her to become an idol. And I'll admit, this episode at first kind of lost me. And this was one of the reasons why this episode has grown on me over time, because the way it starts with the idol Mikuru stuff and the whole ninja Mark stuff, I was like, oh no, this episode's losing me already. But luckily it did a really good job of gaining me back. The stuff with idol Mikuru isn't really just the anime trying to be lol random quirky or whatever. It's actually done really well and with reason. And I think this is the reason why the episode's so controversial, because there's some really obvious depth, a lot of depth here with this plotline that not a lot of people are really looking into. They're just kind of looking at it in surface value, which is weird to me. So I guess here I am to explain it and say why it is I really like this plotline. And there's a lot of reasons, so I'm going to try and kind of get through this as cleanly as possible without trying to mess up all my points, because there is a surprising amount of depth here. The first is it kind of makes the rest of this reboot anime really frustrating, because if you have to do a reboot, this is how you do it. What do I mean? What I mean is they should be taking characters who didn't really have much to do before the reboot and adding new dimensions and elements to them. Mikuru is a character who didn't really do much in the original Vanguard, and she's been promoted to like main cast here, and that's good. The only other real example of this I can think of really is Ibuki. How Ibuki got given the extra kind of character arc with him becoming good and using Neon Messiah for the first time and everything. And I was kind of hoping for more stuff like this. I was kind of hoping for them to take characters that hadn't really been given very much before the reboot and kind of fleshing them out in different ways. And this episode is a really good example of that because yes, it's an episode where Asuka is trying to convince Mikuru to become an idol, but there's a lot more to it than just that. So the first thing to point out is this is all up to interpretation. This is how I viewed the episode. But the way I viewed it, right, is that Mikuru was loving every second of it. So Asuka offers her the ability to become an idol, and immediately she acts flustered, right? Kind of like a tsundere, I guess. But then when Asuka, kind of makes her go into the idol dressing room, it doesn't really take very long for Mikuru to try not one but two of the dresses on. I do kind of have a problem with her trying that first dress on because she herself says that she didn't like that dress because it was too fan servicey and, showed too much of her body, which you could clearly tell that before she put it on, so I don't know why she did. But this anime has to meet its fan service quota, I guess. But the fact that she put two dresses on means that she wasn't really resisting against it that much. And I feel like that's something that carries through the rest of the episode. She's a character who is saying that she doesn't want to become an idol and is pretending to resist against it because, one, she's embarrassed, and because, two, she doesn't really, she just doesn't really know how to embrace that side of herself, I guess. Like she says at one point in the episode that she's never put on makeup before, and that's a straight up lie. Like, that has to be. I refuse to believe a character like her has never ever worn makeup before, and it goes along with my theory that everything she does and says in this episode is her loving every minute of it, but trying her absolute hardest not to show it. Like, she's constantly blushing throughout this entire episode, and she doesn't really hesitate all that much whenever anything happens. Like, Asuka isn't exactly being forceful with Mikuru, and Mikuru just kind of goes along with it, She does wear the dress, she does end up getting the makeup put on, she does do the photo shoot, and even when she does get let go by Asuka and says no to her, she still keeps the makeup on. She doesn't even bother to wipe it off. And that, again, adds to my theory that Mikuru actually loves every second of this. From Asuka's point of view, it kind of makes sense. When I say kinda, I will say this is kind of like my biggest flaw with the episode in that Asuka is trying, to get card capital. She wants card capital for herself. And her strategy here is to bargain. She realized in the first episode or two that doing it forcefully, with a megaphone in front of Shin's shop didn't work. And so now she's taken a more kind of subdued approach by kind of trying to bargain with each of the individual members. In episode 1, she kind of tried to bargain with Mark, which worked because then Mark ended up card fighting against Shin. In episode 2, she did just straight up bargain with Shin. And now she's bargaining with Mikuru. And this is good. I like this. This is a really good way of having a compelling villain because it's a villain that can adapt and change as time goes on to find more and more effective strategies. I really love this, actually. The only problem is, why are you bargaining with Mikuru? See, I don't really think you gain much by getting Mikuru on your side. Maybe she's just trying to bargain with each of Shin's friends individually, so that she can basically outnumber him and have him on his own, which means he's less likely to resist. Maybe that's what it is, but it just feels weird that they put so much focus on Asuka doing this specifically because she wants the card shop. But it doesn't make sense because, again, Mikuru can't exactly give her the card shop. Mikuru has no real say in it, so I don't know. But other than that, though, the rest of the episode is basically perfect, in my opinion. Everything about it really works. There's a part in the episode when Asuka is bargaining with Mikuru, and she tells Mikuru that hey, if you become a successful idol, you can basically become a mascot for the card shop, which will effectively save it by driving up sales and everything, right? And it has like this image of Mikuru like hanging out and having fun with Shin and the others. And I really liked that because it was very kind of melancholic, and it was the first good use of dramatic irony. Because when you have prequels, your audience are going to know what'll happen because it's a prequel. You know, we know how things will turn out because we know it'll turn out similar to, you know, the earlier story arcs in the reboot and G. By showing the characters having fun and being friends and saving the card shop, that's kind of melancholic because the audience know full well that's not how this ends up. Not by the time we hit G at the very least. And that's kind of sad. And, you know, it invokes an emotional response. At least for me, the first time the anime has done something like that in a little while at least. And that's good. And then you have Mikuru just refusing the offer. And Mikuru refusing the offer, I feel like has a bit more like layers to it than on the surface. Again, that's why this episode is one that kind of grows on you, because it parades itself as something really fan servicey and silly. But then the more you think about it, the more kind of deeper it gets, which is really cool. It's the rest of the Vanguard reboot has kind of been the opposite of this, where it like pretends to be kind of fake deep, but it's as shallow as like a puddle. Whereas this is kind of the opposite, which I really, really enjoyed. Because Mikuru turns down the offer, which again, I think is more of her being, you know, embarrassed and not really knowing how to like handle her own emotions and stuff. And this is cool because, again, working with the dramatic irony, if you've seen G, Mikuru ends up in a really bad, like, lot in life, I guess. Like, well, whenever we see her in G, well, that's the thing. We don't really ever see her in G. She gets barely any screen time. Whatever screen time she does get is her basically sleeping, you know, because she's got such an important job that she can't really afford to do anything but work and sleep. And she has to look after Chrono, who isn't even her own son. She's only looking after him out of circumstance. She's only looking after him because she has no choice but to. And she's in this situation where she gets no real time for herself. She's always working so that she can house and feed her nephew, who she didn't even choose to look after, while her brother has gone missing. And it's bad, it's depressing, and unfortunately G doesn't really do much with this. That's an easy arc to get like an emotional response from, but they don't really dwell upon it in the right way to do so. This episode, by benefit of hindsight, makes that stuff in G even sadder because she was this close to having a life that she actually liked. She was this close. She was one word away from living a life as an idol, being able to sing and dance and dress up and wear makeup and all this stuff as a job. And sure, it'd be a difficult job, of course, but it would be better than being a businesswoman who sleeps all the time. And that's really interesting. And I feel like a lot of people watching this episode don't really think about that, and that's fine because, you know, that's external thinking. You have to eventually watch the G to get it. But it still really works, you know? It really adds a lot of depth to this initially really shallow character. And that's what the reboot should have done. The reboot should have done more of this. And yeah, because of that, this is easily my favorite episode of the reboot, because it just takes something fairly simple, like this character who previously hadn't really been given much screen time or development, and actually giving them a really solid and interesting character. I just really like this, and I don't necessarily expect the story arc to build upon this much more. I do very, very much feel like this is a one and done episode. There's just so much rich depth to really dig into with this seemingly simple character thrown into such a silly scenario. And again, I saw this episode be criticized for being too silly and over the top, and I'm like, if you've not seen episode 2 of this exact same arc, that episode's way sillier and to no real end. At least this adds a really interesting character study, and that's what the slice of life elements of Vanguard should be. We should take these characters and flesh them out in a really interesting way, and this episode honestly does it a little better than a lot of the episodes from even Link Joker, my favorite story arc. And so yeah, that's why I love this episode. I'm really looking forward to seeing more of the Shin arc now, definitely. I don't expect the rest of the arc to live up to this episode. I genuinely do expect this episode to be my favorite of the reboot era overall. And yeah, I just really loved it. Plain as that.